All right, so I'm going to do this all the way from the beginning, at least the first part of it to get you started. This is going to be a video on the in-class forms, methods on a form. And I'll go ahead and actually, this is a student view, which you would see. And the reason I'm doing it is just to kind of remind you of the parts of this. Again, you can look at the snapshot, which will show you what the form will look like. In this case, not a big deal because you're actually going to get the basic form set up to start with. So let's go ahead and download that. And this downloads in a compressed. So I'm going to show this in the folder. And now I can go ahead and extract it. When I go to extract it, though, I probably want to put it someplace I know where it is. Some people have suggested the desktop. Wherever you feel comfortable and you know where it's going to be. And then I'll go over, maybe at the end I'll get a chance to show you zipping it up again, which some of you are still struggling a little bit with. But in general, you're getting that. So there we go. I'm extracting it to the desktop. I can look at the desktop here and you can see there it is. When I go to open a solution, there's the SLN file, and this is probably the preferred method for opening a solution. This will recognize all the files that are supposed to be associated with it. When I go to zip it back up to submit it or to transport it someplace else, what I want to do is go up one level at the desktop and zip this whole folder back into a zip file and then email myself or upload it to Valima into my workspace, which can be a convenient location, which if I get a chance I'll try to show you that. So let's go ahead. I'll just double click on this. Again, I should only use trustworthy sources. I think you're pretty safe in this case. So as you can see, it opened up relatively well. Sometimes you find that the configuration of the machine you're on isn't what you want. You really want to be able to navigate, go over here to view and open up the Solution Explorer. You can always open up the properties, right-click properties. So lots of different ways to get around. Let's go ahead and open that file. Double click on methods form. Methods form, yeah. So, and there's the two views, right? There's the code behind view. There's the form designer view. Now, if you recall, we did some of this in class, but I'll go ahead and redo some of it. So here is the fill all button. I'm going to double click it. And that's going to automatically, for me, generate and associate this method with that button click event. That's really what's going on behind the scenes. Now, in order to get some practice with methods, what I'm going to do is create a method that I call, right? So in this case, I am going to, I'll make it private. That's the access modifier. In this case, any method within this form that is within this scope here will have access to private methods. This one will not return anything. It will simply, this one's going to set all the buttons to, all the text boxes to the same value, right? So maybe I'll call it set value. And does it need to take a parameter? So that's it. What does it need to do its job? So for set value, we need the value. I could give an integer. That would be fine. In this case, because I'm going to populate a string, I'm going to go ahead and just make it a string. Maybe call it set2, lowercase o, set2, right? And then in here, I'm going to actually set the different text boxes. Now, you go over here to the code behind view, you actually can get a look at all the text boxes are right here, right? So let's see, factorial text, sum of 1 to n text is even text. These are the ones I'm going to set, right? So see, I'm going to cheat a little bit. Be careful when you do stuff like this, because cutting and pasting can lead to difficult times, right? But let's see, I just get the names over here, because really what I need is those names. Now, if you'd use some sort of Hungarian notation, which this form was not set up to use. This is using the standard notation, Camelback notation, which is a very valid notation there. So then text, right? And all I have to do is really do this, right? Set to. And so I'll be a little crafty here and just, I think there's actually 5 of these, so I might be missing one of the text boxes. And what's it complaining about there? Oh, I have left out, as you see, I've attempted to assign a value to a text box itself, but we actually need to assign the property of the text box, which is of type string. And it's not going to give me any leeway there, right? This is a strongly typed language, C#, so it's going to require that the type of set to matches the type I'm assigning. Factorial text box is a text box type. Text is a string, so I can do the assignment to the text. I cannot do it to the text box. So let's double check here. What am I missing? Is odd. Is odd. Right? There you go, tab. Do the autocomplete with my tab. So now I have set value set up, and all I need to do is call it when I get this button click, right? And you could have done those statements inside the button click. That's perfectly valid. However, in this case, we're trying to get a little practice with creating methods, so we did it in a separate method. Now, what do we want to set it to? We want to set it to this text box here, right? Fill all text box, right? And again, use the autocomplete to your advantage. If I start with an F, you can see there it is. That's the button, and I want the text box. And text. Now notice I'm not converting this. I'm not doing anything with it because it's really doing a straight application of text to text, right? These are the same types. So now let's go ahead, and I can go ahead and run the form. Now I'm not doing any checking to make sure that this input is an integer, right? So go ahead, run the form. The first time it'll take a little longer probably. Okay, so I will put in, say, 3. And it does, in fact, apply that across all the text boxes. All right? The clear doesn't work yet. What would I have to do for the clear and the exit? Well, the clear, it turns out, I could go ahead and set all these manually to the empty space, but if you think about it, what am I doing in that case? Well, I'm actually clearing, I'm putting the same value in there, So what if I called set value, right, and set it to the empty string? Could I do that? And the answer is yes. Now there is one text box missing, right? Because that one's not included in the. So let me ask you something. Could I, right now I'm going to do this manually here. That would work. Could I add the fill all text box here so that it applied the same text that was already in it to itself? And the answer is yes. So that might be convenient because then I don't have to have this special case. I treat them all the same, right? So I can get rid of that extra one. And then when I do the clear button, now I'm actually not rewriting this code, which might be nice because if I add text boxes, I just have to add them to this one place. This one just calls my set value when I do the clear. But now of course, I should immediately test that. I should always do this short iterations testing. So let me add it. I'll do a for, I'll do that, and then I'll do a clear. Works. And this is one of the advantages of clicking the exit button again, which hasn't been set up. So this is one of the advantages of methods. Let's go ahead and, before I click it again and look foolish, let's go ahead and this. This dot close. This dot close. There it is. Right. Now, the advantage of calling this close on this form, opposed to closing the application, is that if I were to have a multi-form application, this close would only close the current form. It wouldn't close the entire application. At this point, we're not dealing with a lot of multi-form applications, but it's good to think about. So often in the exits, you'll prefer to do this dot close. All right, so we have a clear button. We have the button to apply all the values to the different methods. Now let's move on to square it. So again, we're going to create a method to do this job. So let's go private, again, tab, using my IntelliSense. Does this return anything? Yes, I'm going to go ahead and return an int in this case. Again, I could do this all within the body of the click, but for practice, I want to do this as a separate method. All right, so this is going to square, right, whatever I give it. And then I will have my code brace, my left code brace, my right code brace. And I actually prefer the to put the code braces on a separate line, not to. So it's already complaining. It's telling me I'm not returning a value. It's always good to look at errors. Of course, as you write, sometimes errors kind of get in your way. Like, I'm not done yet. You're already telling me something wrong. So what do I return? I'm going to simply return number times number. And this is a perfectly valid way to do this. I could, if I wanted to, I could create a variable called int square and say int. I could do this, int square equals number, using my IntelliSense again, times num again with the tab for the autocomplete, and then return square. Perfectly valid. Perfectly valid. And when you're making decisions about how you should do things, one of the things is readability. Do you understand what the code is doing? Can you come back and look at it and understand it properly? You know, and say, oh, this is what this code does. So that's a perfectly reasonable approach to returning the square. So now I've created the method, but I'm going to want to actually use it inside the square click. I'm going to have to call it here, right? So I need the text from the square int, right? Square it box there. But again, this is text. And if you recall, I need to actually have an integer, right? So I need to do a convert. And I want an int, so 2 int 32 is probably pretty good, right? That's a 32-bit, which is the int type. But what do I want to do with this? Well, I could assign it like so, and then pass it. And I'll do it this way this time. And one of the next ones I will actually do it directly in the, what am I doing here? So now I need to actually set the square it label. And then here I want to call the function square. And I need to pass it a number. I've actually created that number there. It's an int, right? Okay, what's the problem here? Let's take a look. So it's saying, wait a second, this returns an int. I can't use it directly. So I can do something like this. Turns out that this return value here is recognized by the compiler. It's saying, oh, I'm going to get an int back from square. And then it's saying, oh, well, then I can do operations on it, like toString. Perfectly legal. A-OK. And again, also perfectly fine to do it the long way. Int equals, I will do square, square again, use my autocomplete with the tab. Pass it num, which is the local variable that I'm going to use and pass in as an argument. And then this will be sent and assigned to number. Then number will be multiplied. Square will be returned back to this position. Then it will be assigned to answer. And in this case now I will change this to just be answer, right? And get rid of the method call, both perfectly legal. There we go. So now I've created a method to give me the square. I've called the method from the square at click. So let's go ahead and give it a shot. Let me run this. So I have 3. I will fill all. I could have just typed 3 in there, and now I'll square it. 9. Does that look correct? And it does. And probably what I should have done is said, okay, I got a 4, I'll fill all. And I should have said to myself, what is the value here? What is that value? What is it going to be? And 4 times 4 is 16, so I expect it to be 16. And that's what it is. Always good to preempt your testing with, do I know what the answer is going to be? Now notice when I hit clear, it doesn't actually clear that, right? Because I only actually have in my clear the update of the text boxes. So I might need to consider fixing that or changing that. All right? But I can still use that same call that I use. I just have to add the one for the labels. All right? Back to methods. Let's take a look at the designer again. Okay, so what about is even, right? Is even. So again, I'll double click here. Now again, these steps here are going to be identical almost, right? I'm going to do a convert. I'm going to have some sort of answer, right? But let's go ahead and figure out first what the method is for is even, right? So I'll do private, which again is okay because I'm calling it within the form. I want to return what type of thing? Well, I'm going to do is even. So what type of thing does that sound like to you? It turns out that's a Boolean value, right? So I will return a Boolean value. I'll call this something like is even, something fancy like that, tricky. This is called a predicate method. And a predicate method just means something that returns a true or false. But you will hear the term predicate method. Now again, I'm not returning anything. So it's complaining. Now how can I tell if a number is even or not? So I can, in fact, use my favorite operator, the modulus operator. So if number equal number modulus 2 is 0. Now, this can be a little trickier than you expect. It turns out people often make a mistake with this. So if number modulus 2 equals 0, I should return true. And otherwise I should return false. So I could say return true here. Thank you for my updates. All right. So I could say return true. And if I get down here, if I don't return true, that is, I could put this in an else, but I could simply say return false. Either way is perfectly valid. A-okay? Because I could put this in else, and then it would either return true or return false. In this case, if it doesn't do this, then it has to do that. So but if it does this, it'll never make it to the returning false. So I can do it this way. There's actually a problem with this code. It is not correct, and the tricky part is this will work. It's the odd one that can be tricky. This actually is fine, and I'll actually show you another shortcut for this too. I can actually simply return this same thing. The is odd can be tricky because if I get a negative number, I will get a negative remainder. But in case of even, it's actually perfectly safe to check on 0, right? Because negative 2 modulus 2 is still going to be, I don't know. I'll have to check that. Negative 2 modulus 2. Anyway, we'll give it a shot. So now I have to call this, and again, I'm going to do these same things, but let's do it a little different this time. And I'll do is even, right? Again, I can use my IntelliSense to my advantage, and I'll do the convert right inside here, and then I'm going to, it is the is even button, is even click. Wait. What's the text? I forgot the name of the text for this. Is even text box. I don't think that was showing up. All right. So is even text, right? Dot text. Right. And I finished the last paren for the method call, right? And semicolon. Now I'm not doing anything with this yet. So I'm going to do this the really, right, I want to set the is even label dot text to this. Now this returns a Boolean value, so it's probably not going to be happy about that. There it is, Boolean to string. So again, I can use the dot operator and do the toString, and then it's a method call, so it has to have parentheses. All right. So that's great. And these are different approaches, right? It's the same basic idea that I'm doing up there, but I'm doing it a little different. So let's go ahead and start this. All right, I can put a 3 down here, right? So what do I expect to have happen? Is even 3. Well, 3 is not even, so false. Let's try a negative number, see what happens. Negative 3 is not even. What about negative 2? So that does work. And 2 should be true, right? And 4 should be true. All right. So that looks like it works. Let's go back to this for a second, and let me show you a little something that's interesting and a shortcut. So right now, this is a Boolean expression, right? This actually already determines if it's even or not. So literally, instead of having to do a conditional, I can simply return that comparison. Perfectly legal, acceptable, right? There you go. Little shortcut, cuts down on some coding. But again, the choice of this, it's a small advantage. It's probably a little more efficient. If I'm calling this many times, that's probably something I would care about. But a lot of times, you should do it the way that you understand the best, so that when you come back at it, you'll be able to say, this is what's going on with the code. All right. So let's take a look at the other ones. Is odd. So is odd, it turns out, let's do is odd for fun, right? So is even, it's almost identical to is even, right? So let's take a look. Is odd. So is odd, I'm going to do this same basic operation here, right? This same thing. And in fact, but let's go ahead and I'm going to create an is odd. Right now I'm calling an is odd that doesn't exist. Let's change these over to make sure I remember to do it. Is odd label. Is odd text box, right? I don't have the is odd, but it's going to be almost identical to this. Now, I could do conditionals again. Let's go ahead and make sure I remember to change the name of this. And once I do that, there it goes. You see the red underline disappears because now is odd exists. It's not going to complain anymore. Basically, it's doing little mini compiles as we go. So this is actually the opposite of what we want. Do we know a way to flip a Boolean value? And bang. Answer is we do. The bang operator, which hopefully you remember, which actually will just flip the value, right? Now I could do this the manual way I did it initially. Perfectly valid, A-OK. What's important is you understand it and your code does what it's supposed to. So we've created a new method. Let's go ahead, and the first thing we should do, of course, is test that method. And we like to do this incremental improvement of our code, right? So 3, so is 3 odd? 3 is odd. Yes. So I should see what in here? True. And I do. Now let's try 2. false. What about a negative number? What about 0? All right. So, good. Looks like that's working, right? The exit works this time. All right. So, what do we have left? Let's see. Sum of n 1 to n and factorial. It turns out there's actually an equation to do this, but this is an opportunity for us to use our loops. So again, we're going to have to do all those conversions we did, just like up here, right? And I'm going to do it this way just to change things up a little bit. And remember, I have my IntelliSense, so sum, and that's the button and the text box, right? And then down here, I'm going to want to do the sum label instead of the, again, control space. Control space will if my autocomplete list doesn't show up automatically, it will bring up the autocomplete for me. That's control space. All right. So now I have the button. I'm calling square right now, but what I want is sum 1 to n. So let's go ahead and create a method. So I'm going to private. This is the access modifier, private. What is it going to return? Well, if I'm adding numbers, integers, they will always return integers. So I'll just return an integer. And then the, what's the name of this? Sum 1 to n. I'm going to take int, which is going to be basically n, right? I could call it number, but I'm just going to, n seems like my function name is going to be 1 to n. Now again, it's mad because I'm not returning the code, any values yet. That's okay. Let's go ahead and change this right now before we forget. Update that. So now it's calling the correct method again. So I need to take a number from 1 all the way up to n and add them together. Do we know any construct that allows us to do basically the same thing over and over again? It's a slight change in what we do, but similar, right? So it turns out yes. And hopefully now, after doing all your loops, you know this. So we're going to start num. We're going to start it equal to 1, right? We could start at 0. It won't matter because it won't affect the answer. But we might as well start it at 1. And as long as num is less than or equal to n, I'm going to keep going. And then my update of the value right here in the third space, right there, and not num plus. It's mad because I should say num plus plus, right? Now remember, in a for loop, this is the postfix operator. I could use the prefix operator. It won't affect it because there's no comparison or anything happening there. It's basically an isolated line of code. So now I'm going to want to have a value to return. So let's create ourselves a variable, int, something fancy like, say, sum. We'll start at 0. I could be tricky and start at 1 and then have num start at 2. I'm not going to. And then I will return that value after the loop. Now it's important to recall that num is not going to be available down here. So let's go ahead and get the, so sum will equal, we'll use the plus equals operator, which, remember, all that does is take whatever this value is, in this case num, and increase sum by whatever that is. Effectively, it is the same as this line of code. Sum equals sum plus num, right? These two lines are equivalent. And recall with this line, sum is retrieved from memory, whatever's stored there right now. Num is whatever's stored there right now. And then we combine the two, and then we overwrite sum, right? This line are equivalent. So let me get rid of the second one. All right. So that should be okay. And we've set this up. Hopefully we've remembered to change everything appropriately, right? So let's give it a shot here. We will start. Now again, we're going to have to test this. And when we test it, we can always retest, right? Choose a number you know. So what if I chose like 1 to start with? Well, hopefully that is 1. Let's see here. I'm not getting anything. What have I done? What have I done incorrectly? So if you looked, well, I'll show you what I did incorrectly. So what happened was 3, if I hit, it's updating the text box, not in fact the label. So let's go back and looking. Right here, I'm assigning it right to the text box, right? So let's go ahead and again, control space, did my autocomplete for me, and found, in fact, once I put the L and then label, boom, all right. So now I've updated the appropriate one. Let's go ahead, well, at least we hope, right? And go back to our testing. And then 3, we fill all boxes. That can be summed to 1, 6. And again, when I'm doing this, particularly as I get to values I don't know, start with values you know and then move up, right? Sounds right, 6. All right. Sounds good. So by starting with 1, 2, you know what the answer should be, and you can, at least by the eyeball, check it. You still want to do some further testing, but that's okay. So, and then the last one is factorial, which factorial means, 5 times 4 times 3 times 2 times 1. It turns out it doesn't matter what order we do it in. Either we start at the bottom and go up to that number, or start down and go. Either way is identical as far as the answer. And it turns out, guess what? It's very similar to this. Right? Very similar. Just call it factorial. What's the only thing we're going to have to change? We should probably change this guy here just to the multican, right? And then instead of plus equals, we'll change that to a times equals, right? And again, this is going to be very similar to this. The difference being I have to maybe more carefully update the variables that I'm, because remember, just like other things, factorial text box. These are variable names, just like your other variable names. Just because it's a text box doesn't mean this isn't a variable that's pointing to a text box. It is. And then down here again, I want factorial, but I want factorial label, right? Dot text. All right. So there, and I'm taking factorial text, converting it to an int, assigning it to num, calling sum 1 to n. Whoop, whoop. This is the danger of pasting code. And let's take a look. All right. So now let's go back. I can run from right here if I want. I always go back to the form, but yeah, perfectly valid to run from here because it's going to just call the main method. So, right. So what do I expect? 3 factorial to be? It's 3 times 2 times 1, which hopefully is 6. Uh-oh. 3 times 2 times 1 is not 0. Let's go back and look at our code. Ah. What's wrong with our code? What is, the first time it comes into the loop, it does mult 0. So down here it says 1 times 0 is 0. And then from then on, this is always 0. So we want to assign this a 1 to begin with. And that won't affect our answer at all. And if you wanted to, you could start at 2 here instead. That'd be perfectly fine. So it won't affect the answer because 1 times any number is itself, right? All right. So we can start at 2. It'll save 1 iteration there if we want. So let's go ahead and start this again. I need the Jeopardy music, I think. All right. So 3, again, choose a nice number. I could have just put the number down here. So what do we expect to see? 3 times 2 times 1 is 6. We get a 6. Let's try maybe a 5, which would be 24 times 5, 120. All right. The one thing, and I'll leave you to do this on your own, is the clear on that. And if you look at the clear method, all right, I clicked the designer. It's going to take a while. There we go. All right. If you look at the clear method, we have the set value. Now what you need to do is do the same thing for the labels, right? So, in fact, I could add the labels here. That might be problematic because then it'll set them to whatever the initial value is, like 3 all over the place. But I could get clear labels. I could have a clear labels method and do that. But I'll leave that to you if you want to do it. All right. So that's the basics of this. You know, try to work it out on your own and play around with it. And that's it. And you know, keep working on your loops. And I will see you on Monday.